Okay, so today we are going to do a short review on Brownson-Berner's human ecological model. We've already learned about how this theory can affect the individual's life in many different ways. So let's get started. So it starts with the individual. An individual is at the center of this whole thing. And we're only going to discuss the individual and how one individual is affected in many different ways. So the first layer of it is the microsystem. And it is the layer that the individual can change. The individual can make changes throughout their whole time. Consists of their peers. So the individual can change their peers. They can change how they act with their peers, their family. The individual can change, how they act with their family, if their family goes and does things, how that works. Next, they can interact with their school. And this basically is like if you just have an attitude with your teacher, you can change that. So the individual and the microsystem affect each other directly, and the individual can change that. The next system would be the exosystem, and the individual can't really change the exosystem, and it affects them kind of indirectly. So an example would be the family's work environment, and this would be like if the father came home angry and took it out on the children. Like I said, the individual can't really change that, and it does affect him indirectly, but he can't change how his father's day at work went. Another example would be mass media. This would be, ads saying you need to be skinnier, all of that. It affects the individual indirectly, and he can't change the mass media. He can only deal with it. Alright, so this is the exosystem. It affects the individual indirectly. He can't really change the mass media or his family's work environment. He can only maybe change when his father gets home, which would be then in his microsystem. So the next system is the macro. And this consists of things that the individual can't really change. An example would be laws, culture, and social conditions. And also social conditions. Alright, so this is the macro system. It affects the individual indirectly. They're not things the individual can change. Like an example would be poverty. But poverty then would affect his exosystem, which would affect his microsystem, which would affect the individual. So they indirectly affect the individual. The last layer of this is the chronosystem, and it's this big area that can affect actually more than one individual. An example with this would be your generation you grew up in. So an example would be baby boomers. Right now they're getting ready to retire, and so there's going to be a lot of Social Security used to pay for retirement. So again, the generation would affect the macro, which would affect the exo, which would affect the micro, which means you're probably noticing a pattern and how these all interfere with each other. And that is actually called the mesosystem. And the mesosystem, this layer is how the layers interact. An example would be parent-teacher conference, or like the father had a bad day at work, so he came home and he got mad at the kids. So this is how they all interact with each other. And this is probably a very important part of the Brownson-Berner's theory. So the theory is used to understand how different elements affect the individual and how those elements interact with each other. Sometimes in this theory, the individual can change some things, but mostly the theory explains how the elements interact with each other and affect the individual. Keep this theory in mind as we move on to different theories this semester.